There's Jeff Beals, Dave Clegg, Antonio Delgado, Brian Flynn, Gareth Rhodes, and Pat Ryan. Okay. So let's see. Cindy was going to be here at 10:30, but she's not, so we'll move on to basically, Laura right here is going to be giving the time. She's our timekeeper. You guys got 2 minutes. She has a 1-minute warning sign, a stop sign, and a little bell if you keep going over. So we just want to keep it moving, guys. Let's see. I kind of rushed forward there. So no applause, please, if you can hold it, because otherwise it'll drag on. Again, we don't have time. If you need more information, please visit their websites, call or email the campaign. They'll be happy to talk with you and keep you updated. Again, there's literature on the lobby, etc. Mr. Beals, if you could start and pass the mic down as you go. So 2-minute introductory statements, and then we'll get to questions.
Hi, everybody. You ready to beat John Faso? I'm Jeff Beals. I'm a former U.S. diplomat, and I'm a former CIA intelligence officer whose career began under the Clinton administration and then stretched over 2 administrations. I served our country overseas in the West Bank and Gaza Strip with my friend Chris Stevens, who we lost in Benghazi, and I went on to serve our country in Iraq a year into the war, helping find a way out of that war. I was decorated by the Army and the State Department for the work I did there to help get us out of that conflict. And I came home after it to my family's farm here in the Hudson Valley to find a way to make a difference on a grassroots level, because I became convinced that the fight for democracy, which was something I had believed was taking place overseas, was really something that had to happen here at home. And I became a teacher, and I teach high school history in Woodstock. And like you all, I read the papers every day. And I picked it up this morning, and it told a tale that I think is one people in this room understand, but people outside of it often don't, people outside our district. The New York Times is reporting 300,000 jobs added to our economy. But if you read the fine print of that article, you'll know that wages are not going up in our economy, and people are still struggling desperately to get by. The national organization of Bernie Sanders staffers, called the Justice Democrats, looked at this election, interviewed me, and endorsed my campaign because I'm putting forward a people's platform to tackle this terrible crisis in our economy, to stand up for the policies that will benefit the more than 90% of us that are being left out, even while the headlines blare job growth or blare that the stock market is going up. The simple fact is we're struggling to get by, and we need Medicare for all. We need an effort to take on the fossil fuel industry so that we can create a Green New Deal in our country. And we need to put the focus back on diplomacy in our foreign affairs and not militarism. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Dave Clegg. Got a different kind of skill set. I'm a trial lawyer and an ordained deacon, so these guys are worried about me having home court advantage here. We've got a Congress that's owned by corporations, the NRA, gun manufacturers, the fossil fuel industry. They won't do anything about gun violence, and they allow fossil fuel industries to pollute our air, our water, and destroy our environment. We have a lot of talking to do about standing up to corporations, but I'm somebody who's actually done that. As a trial lawyer, I've held multinational corporations responsible, corporations like Walmart, that actually use predatory practices toward their own employees. When I go to Congress, I'm going to fight for workers' rights. I'm going to fight for organized labor, for the right to organize, for protections for workers. Now, we've got an administration right now, Donald Trump, that's attacking our civil rights. I spent 4 decades fighting for the civil rights of people in our district. As human rights chairman, I've worked to expand and protect the human rights of our community. Let me go to Congress and fight back that evil, ignorant agenda. Let me fight for women's rights. The Me Too movement is something that's inspired me. Watching women stand up against oppression, against harassment, I'm proud to say that for decades, I've been fighting for women's rights too, including giving pro bono time to women who've been subjected to abuse, hundreds of hours. And I'm going to fight for equal pay and equal opportunity, along with medical care. Medicare for all is something I believe in very strongly. I will fight to my last breath because I think it will transform our country. Every woman who needs a mammogram, every father who needs to give his own child care is something I will fight with my last breath to do. Thank you.
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing today? Good, good, good. Antonio Delgado, Dutchess County resident, proud recipient of the Dutchess County Democratic Committee endorsement. I live in Rhinebeck with my wife, Lacey, and our young boys, Maxwell and Coltrane. Now, I'm standing in front of you today because I remember growing up in a working class family in Schenectady. And I remember how important those jobs were for my parents at GE. And how those jobs helped us work our way up and live that story of the American dream, that story of upward mobility. Our apartments over time got bigger. The neighborhoods got safer. We cut coupons, put clothes on layaway, but over time our lives got better because folks were focusing back then on working families. I was taught integrity, character, compassion, service, empathy. Went to Colgate, earned a Rhodes Scholarship while I was there. And I can promise you when I was cutting coupons with my mother on Saturday mornings, we weren't talking about me studying philosophy at Oxford. Came home and got my law degree at Harvard. The best thing about that, meeting my lovely wife, Lacey, who grew up an hour away from me in Woodstock. Both of us are from upstate New York, the Hudson Valley, and proud children of this place. And both of us benefited from a different time. I'm now a lawyer. She's now a documentary filmmaker. The last 40 years, a different story has happened. I'm 41. The economy's doubled in size. Wages have gone nowhere. 80% of us are being asked to share 7% of the wealth. That is staggering inequality, and it is not sustainable in the democracy. And what do the folks in Congress want to do about it? They want to take away health care from the most vulnerable amongst us to give a tax break to a wealthy few. They want to roll back any sort of real tax reform on the backs of working and middle-class families to give a tax break to the wealthy few and big corporations. Well, I'm tired of it. I'm tired of it, and I think all of you are tired of it. What we need is a discussion about universal care. What we need is a discussion about robust public works infrastructure. What we need is to move off of fossil fuel and move to renewable energy. And what we need is a paid fair check. We need paid equal family leave. We need all these things right now to get the job done. What we need is a person who gets it. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you to Todd, the Hillsdale Democrats, and to the Copake Democrats who helped organize this event. I'm Brian Flynn. There's the Copake crowd here. I'm Brian Flynn. I'm a lifelong progressive Democrat, activist, small business owner, and the third generation in my family to choose Greene County as our home. I keep hearing as I travel around the district that people don't recognize the country anymore. They see democracy coming under attack. They see the rise of white nationalism and the threat of authoritarianism right here in America. They see friends and neighbors who voted for Barack Obama who are now voting for Donald Trump. So how did we get here? Because it's not about Trump. He's the result, not the cause. It's because for decades we've ignored the American worker and the economic pain and anxiety that they've been living with. For decades, we've allowed our small towns and rural communities to fall behind. We've paid women a fraction of what they're owed, and we've done worse by communities of color. We not only push people down, we've kept them there. And that's the pain that Trump preyed upon. So if you want to stop Trump, then we have to come up with plans and ideas that address the underlying issues that allowed him to happen. And that's why I have a plan that addresses that. It's my plan for the American worker, because it not only creates jobs, it also addresses the barriers that have kept people down. And it starts with Medicare for All, which I've been advocating for since 2004. It's about investments that create a clean energy revolution. It's about criminal justice reform, including legalization of marijuana, to reduce the economic and racial disparities. It's comprehensive immigration reform. It's policies that empower and enable women in the workforce and finally end the assault on the rights of women and girls. And it prioritizes public education and training for 21st century jobs. But it's a plan that builds an America that works for all of us. But if we're going to make that happen, we need a proven leader to get it done. Someone who's actually been an effective activist for progressive causes. Somebody who's been to Washington and got legislation passed. Somebody who's created hundreds of blue-collar American jobs. Because right now, in Washington, we need a doer, not a talker. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Todd. Thank you, Hillsdale and Copake Democrats, for putting this together. Beautiful room. And when I look out today, we do this all across the district. It shows me that we want to win this time. We want to win this November. We're not going to take losing this time around. And I believe that I give our party a real shot to win this race for a few reasons. First, my local upbringing here in the district. Born and raised right here in New York 19, but growing up the way many people here in New York 19 grew up. Born and raised working on a farm in Ulster County. After I graduated from high school in this district, I did what a lot of young people do. I didn't go right to college. Went out and got a job drilling water wells. I know here in Hillsdale a lot of people, you have water wells in your backyard, so call me if you have any sulfur problems. I joined my local fire department, and then working hard became the first in my family to earn a 4-year degree, thanks to Pell Grants and TAP Aid. But that background will speak to a lot of people here in this community, a district where almost 70% of our neighbors don't have college degrees. But I'm proud to have government experience, the only candidate on this stage who's worked in state government right here in New York State. And that public service background, I had the opportunity to work in the governor's office, fighting to pass marriage equality for all New Yorkers, standing up and proud to be part of the administration that banned fracking here in New York State. It's a real public service record that I'm proud of, but also that when I am a member of Congress, to be able to work with our local town supervisors, our village mayors, to help with important infrastructure projects to help move our communities ahead. But third, I am running a very different type of campaign. You may have seen my Winnebago on the way in here. I have a 1999 Ford Winnebago. I'm going to every single town in New York 19. We are bigger than Rhode Island and Connecticut combined. And you saw those nasty attack ads they ran against the last couple of Democrats who ran. We need a candidate who has the energy, the enthusiasm, to have a presence in every single town in this district. And that's the approach I'm taking, a real grassroots campaign, going to every single town to listen, hear the issues, and have that shared cultural connection with the residents of this community. Thank you so much.
Hey, good morning. I'm Pat Ryan. I'm excited to be here, but I have to say there's a small part of me that wishes I was at Catamount right now. Growing up, I grew up in Kingston, born and raised there. My family's been in Ulster County for 5 generations, but our ski team and our ski club in middle school would drive up on Friday nights to Catamount. So I have a lot of great memories right there and all across this area. Growing up, my grandpa, my mom's dad, always told this story. He was 17 when Pearl Harbor was attacked, and he actually lied about his age so that he could do what he thought was right and serve and join the Navy and fight in World War II. And that always stuck with me as a kid. That, watching both of my parents, especially my mom, a public school teacher her whole career in Kingston, I realized pretty early on that our democracy, our values, any progress we make in this country, it doesn't just happen. It is not automatic. It has to be constantly renewed and constantly fought for. It's driven by people like all of you who decide on a Saturday morning to come here because you want to be a part of that. And I've always felt that responsibility. It led me to West Point. It guided me through 2 combat deployments in Iraq. It inspired me to start my small businesses, and it's driving me to run right now. And I look around the country, and I think a lot of you feel this way. And I've been shaking my head from an economy that's increasingly focused on those who already have too much, to a public education system that is woefully underfunded, to millions of Americans who still don't have quality, affordable health care. And I shake my head, and I feel like this is not the country that me and my fellow soldiers risked our lives to defend. And I think back to day 1 at West Point, where I was taught officers eat last, after your soldiers. That's what's wrong with Washington right now. That's what's wrong with John Faso and so many others. I'm running because we need leaders who are actually going to put their community and their country ahead of themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate the first statements there. We're now going to do 3 questions, and we're going to reverse order here. So, Pat, you get to speak again. The first question is on the obvious one. It's electability. In this district, Republicans have been quite successful in labeling Democrat opponents carpetbaggers, as you know. By way of introducing yourselves to us again, can you tell us your history in New York 19 and how you will answer this predictable charge if you are the nominee? Some of you have already done this, but just elaborate because I'm sure this is a question everybody asks. So.
It's
2 minutes.
All right, you're stuck with me again. So yeah, I talked a little bit about this, and I think ultimately what you'll probably hear through the course of this discussion is all of us generally agree pretty closely on what are the problems and the priorities, and how are we going to fix them. And there's some slight nuances there, which is good and important. But at the end of the day, I think we're all pretty aligned in what we need to do. And so I think this is the right first question, because what it boils down to for me is who can actually win and get that stuff done here and be part of the 24 and hopefully many more seats that we have to win to take back the House on November 6th, 2018. And this has to be one of those districts. So the charge, the question of electability and the charge of, carpetbagging or potential carpetbagging, I think what that speaks to is really, do you understand where we're coming from here? Do you know the struggles that people are facing? Have you driven around and seen and talked to the families that are working 3, 4? I talked to a family working 5 jobs between 2 parents, none of which provided any health care coverage or other benefits. I mean, that's just wrong. And we have to be able to speak to that from a place of your gut and your heart. And that's something that I can do. As I said, I grew up here. My family's been in the district in Ulster County for 5 generations. I don't quite know why, but my Irish ancestors landed at Ellis Island, got on a boat, got off at the Rondout in Kingston, and stayed there. So we've been part of the community a long time. And so, I think that ultimately I'll be able to speak to that and tell those stories. And I think when I think about why I'm in this race, what it all boils down to is, I talked about this a little bit. I grew up here watching my whole family serve, watching my grandpa, who was an alderman in Kingston for almost 20 years. I wanted to do the same thing. I left this community to go serve. It took me all over the world. And now I'm back because I want to continue to serve. And if FASO comes after us, that's what I'll say. Sorry.
I hope FASO comes after me on that point, because I was born and raised in this district, unlike John Faso, who moved here to run for the state assembly in the 1980s. So I'm happy. I hope he goes after me on this. The New York Times did a story on this race and compared a number of us candidates and said my roots here in the New York 19 are beyond dispute, because they are. Born and raised, grew up working on a farm. But being born and raised that's not only important, it's how you grew up. If you look at what Congress is today, the average wealth of a member of Congress today is $1 million. It's 18 times the average income of a family here in New York 19. So is it any surprise that Congress puts forward the policies that only benefit the top 1%? I'm running because we need a Congress that looks more like New York 19 and a Congress that looks more like America. We need to send working class people to Congress. I believe in a single-payer healthcare system because I've lived here and I know what it's like to live without health insurance. I know what it's like to go to the hospitals in this community when my family has a health crisis. I believe in fighting for a living wage because I've worked here in New York 19 for a minimum wage job. I know how hard it is as a young person graduating from high school in New York 19 and how hard it is to go out and find work. I know I grew up hiking every peak in the Catskill Mountains, striper fishing on the Hudson River, coming to Catamount as well. I love the environment of our community, and that's why what FASO has done, turning his back on the environment in our community, these votes to allow coal waste into stream, pesticide runoff into streams, are so offensive to me. That's why this is personal to me, and that's why the contrast between myself and FASO couldn't be clearer, and why I believe that I will be the one to repeal it and replace him this fall. Thank you.
As I mentioned earlier, I'm the 3rd generation in my family to choose Greene County as our home. My immigrant Irish grandfather was a bartender over in Leeds, and my father spent his childhood there. And about 15 years ago, my wife and I were looking for a place to raise our kids that had that small town community sense. So we went up to visit friends in Hunter, and we fell in love, and we bought a home, and we've been here ever since. And like maybe many of you, we started part-time and then eventually made the decision to move up here full-time. And it's been a terrific experience for us. During that time, however, sometimes life throws you a curveball. My mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's about 6 years ago. So we had to rent an apartment near her to help manage her care. Anybody who's dealt with the disease understands how hard that can be, but we pulled that off. So we were able to complete our transition up here full-time about a year and a half ago. I think what's important also, my roots run deep. Anybody who's been over to East Durham may have gone past the Michael J. Quill Irish Cultural Center. Michael J. Quill was a famous transit union leader, and he's my great uncle. And when John Faso tweets that all these carpetbaggers are running against me, I say, Dear John, my family's been here since the 1940s, and I'd love to take you on a tour of the museum right here in Greene County, named after my great uncle. The carpetbagger thing's not going to work. But what is going to work is a message that actually talks to what's going on in our communities and what matters to people. And if we've heard today, we actually spoke to and looked at all the polling of what Democratic primary voters care about. Seventh on the list of what things Democratic primary voters care about is jobs. Top on the list of the general public is jobs. So when we look at the person who's going to beat John Faso, we want someone who has deep roots in this district. Somebody, my daughter goes to a public school in Greene County, but you also want someone who can create jobs and respond to that need. And it's interesting, my wife has this obsession with, and this is no offense to anybody here who wears tasseled loafers, but my wife has an obsession with the fact that John Faso keeps accusing us of not being from here, yet he goes around wearing tasseled loafers. And I know in Greene County, you put your Timberlands on in September and you take them off in April. So that'll make a big difference. Thank you. I don't want the Angels to get their wings with the bell there. So thank you very much.
So yes, this is an interesting question to me. So I've been called a carpetbagger. I took an ad out on the first one to do so on John Faso on his lie to Andrea Mitchell, where he promised to not take away her health care. And his response to that ad was to not deal with his behavior or to explain his decision. His response through his spokesperson was to just call me a carpetbagger. So I know now what the charge will be. That's good to know. And it's good to know because it has no merit. Am I born and raised, as people like to say, New York 19? No, I'm not born and raised in New York 19. I was born and raised 20 minutes outside of New York 19 in a working class town called Schenectady by two parents who lived very similar lives to a lot of folks all throughout the Hudson Valley who relied on jobs at GE and IBM and worked their way up from working class to middle class. That is what I know. That is who I am. That is where I come from. And when I go across this district and speak about that to people, that's what resonates and connects. My wife, by the way, grew up in the district, if that is supposed to count, an hour away from me in Woodstock, born the same month, in the same year. We are kindred spirits. Her mother, a small business owner, the head of the Chamber of Commerce in Saugerties. Father, a local accountant in Kingston. I proposed to her at the Ship to Shore in Kingston. We got married at the Catskill in Catskills. Does it start to sound a bit crazy? This is home. And so you got to read deeper into that when you hear a charge like that to understand what's really being suggested. We are not tribal at our core here, okay? We're not founded here as Americans based on language or geography. What makes us great, Mr. Trump, is the fact that we are founded on principles, equality, freedom, justice, opportunity. We have set the bar high. Let's keep it that way.
So my roots go back to 1981, although I did graduate from New Paltz back in 1974. Went to law school, did some Native American rights work out in Nebraska and South Dakota, and then came back here in 1981 because I wanted to raise a family here. Fell in love with the Hudson Valley. So my wife and I have been here since 1981. Our kids have been born here, raised here, went to school here. I've had a business here, a law practice, and I've contributed to the community in a lot of different ways since then. So in the last 36 years, I was involved in a dozen charitable organizations, helped start the local homeless shelter, helped start the Habitat for Humanity in Ulster County. I'm serving on the Human Rights Commission right now for Ulster County. I was serving on the health board before that. So I've got what you would call 1,000 roots in the community. My wife was a school teacher, special ed teacher, and she worked as a wonderful reading teacher for the school system in Kingston. So with me going out and coaching kids for the last 25 years in inner city schools and working with the community in the homeless shelter and the soup kitchens on my deacon's work that I do. So all of that has given me so many ties in the community that I say, John Faso, come, face me. Let's see, you're the corporate lobbyist, and I'm the person who's dedicated his career to serving this community, both as a civil rights lawyer and as making somebody who can uplift the people who are vulnerable and need a helping hand. So that's what I've done for the last 36 years. That's what I bring to the table. I'm going to stand up to him on both levels. One, I can take on powerful forces and win. The other is, I've got so much demonstrated compassion and dedicated time and effort in the community that you can't even come close to that. So I welcome John Faso coming in and talking to me. Thank you.
As I told you all, I am a teacher in Woodstock. My wife, Sue Hare, is a kindergarten teacher there. My sons go to school there. We work in the middle of this district. And I voted against John Faso in the last election. And I'm one of only 2 candidates up here who was here for the last election to say that. But there's something deeper going on with this carpetbagger allegation that we should be thinking about. John Faso is a corporate bagger. I don't know if you've heard that term, but get used to it because it's the one we should be repeating regularly. The people in our district are asking themselves, is this person going to actually represent me, or are they going to be beholden to outside interests, to the people that pull the strings on our economy and our jobs for too long around here? That is where my campaign is unique, and I'm unique as a candidate. I'm one of the only candidates up here, Dave and I, working a job in this district, and in my case, trying to raise a family off of the very, very meager wages on offer here. When I stand up for Medicare for All, it's because I've shelled out $1,200 over the last 3 weeks in my wife's dental bills, and I don't receive benefits on my job. That's important. What's even more important is that not all of the candidates up here do stand for Medicare for All, and there's a reason for that. When you raise millions of dollars to run for this congressional seat, and you raise them from lobbying law firms in New York City, the defense industry, or your own wealth as a venture capitalist, you are not going to wind up being a trustworthy advocate for the working people of our district who earn the average wage of about $30,000 a year in a family, maybe over 50, and are deeply struggling to get by. I think the question people are asking and that we have to speak for is to say we, not John Faso, are the party of the people. We're the party of union workers. We're the party of people struggling to get by, of teachers and farmers who have seen our district take a turn for the worse over the last many years. Now, my story here goes back so far, my grandparents were here before I was even born. But the truth of the matter is, the real question is, who will represent the people of this district? Thank you.
Thank you all. All right, Jeff Beals is going to start on that end again. And this second question is around guns. It's a conventional political wisdom that in swing districts such as New York 19, gun restrictions are a losing issue for Democrats. Do you agree? And are there any new gun laws, gun safety laws, you will support if you are elected to Congress?
Hello again. We are the majority on this issue and on so many others if we have the gumption to stand up for it. That's the message I'm telling you about my campaign when I say stand up for the working people of this district against the corporate interests that have squeezed too much of the wealth out of our country. And it's something I'll repeat again when we speak about the issue of guns. I'm a gun owner. We have guns on my family farm. We know that a gun is a tool on a farm, and I've used them to deal with predators in raising livestock. But the simple fact is that I also know, as do most gun owners and non-gun owners, that we need sensible gun laws in this country, that it has become a national security issue. I'm a teacher in our community doing active shooter drills at my school. Does anybody here do the duck and cover thing in your generation, or active shooter in this one? Well, right now, we're cramming children into small rooms, telling them to stay silent until we can give the all clear. We're traumatizing a generation of young people. Meanwhile, I was a national security official in our government over the course of a decade, which is a unique federal experience to bring to this against John Faso. And I can tell you my friends run the no-fly list. And they tell me, how is it possible that we have this list and we don't have a no-gun list? It's ridiculous. It's outrageous. And it's there for the same reason so many of the other problems in our government are there, because there is a giant corporate interest, which in this case is the gun manufacturers, in other cases the financial industry, that wants to sell more product and sell more guns to the consumers, and will not countenance legislators taking an independent stand because they have a stranglehold on them by the money they've given them and the ability they have to lobby. I'm saying let's break that hold. Let's stand up to ban the AR-15. Let's stand up for universal background checks. Let's close the gun show loophole. And let's do something else. Remember when we opened up the laws so that cigarette companies could be sued for the damage they were doing? Open it up as well for the gun manufacturers. It worked before, it can work here. If we dare to do these things, to stand up for what we know almost 90% of the American people believe, we're going to forge a new majority beyond anything we had before. Thank you.
We have an epidemic of gun violence in this country, and it's being spread by Congress. It's being spread by a Congress that refuses to act, spread by a Congress that kowtows to the NRA and the gun manufacturers. It is shameful. It is cowardly. We have to stop this. We have to protect our children. Thankfully, the children from Parkland, Florida, stood up and shamed all of us for not speaking up. Right? It's time to speak up. It's time to say no. It's time to say we don't have to kowtow. Now, the NRA has gotten everything it wants. The reciprocal concealed carry law that John Faso put into place is an affront to states' rights in New York. It brings concealed carry weapons with guns and loaded from people who are not vetted, who could be violent, who could have deranged backgrounds, who could be drug dealers, walk into our state. That's how beholden John Faso is to the NRA. We have to change that. Everything that Jeff said is correct. As a trial lawyer, give us a chance to sue the gun manufacturers. There are safe, smart guns that will stop a child from pulling out a loaded gun out of some drawer and shooting himself or his friend. We could do this right now, but the gun manufacturers choose not to because of profit. We have to stop this. This is the time to stop it. Brian Mast from Florida lost 2 legs in Iraq. He calls for a ban on the AR-15. We should do no less. Thank you.
I mentioned my 2 boys earlier, and it really disturbs me that here we are, the richest country on earth, and among the wealthiest countries on earth. This is the most dangerous place to raise children in America. The most dangerous place is right here at home. We have a real epidemic here, and I agree with a lot of what was said by my colleagues, but the epidemic isn't just the gun violence piece here. We know what we need, right? We know we need universal background checks. We know we need to ban the bump stock. We know we need the CDC to be able to study gun violence. We know we need to close gun show loopholes and keep guns out of the hands of the mentally ill or domestic abusers or convicted stalkers. And there's broad consensus on this across the aisle, even within NRA due-paying members. This is not up for debate. So what is the other issue? What is it? What's preventing us from having any movement in any direction whatsoever? Well, we all know this too. We keep putting people in Congress who are beholden to a very small group of individuals who lobby like crazy to make them do what they wish. That's it. We've got to stop sending people to Congress who are not there to do the work for the people, who are not there to do the work for democracy and reflect the will of the people. No one is up here saying, let's take all guns away. The Second Amendment is a right that ought to be protected. There is value in gun ownership. There's nothing mutually exclusive about acknowledging that fact and at the same time saying, we have a problem of gun violence in this country and we need to figure it out. And how about political leaders? You act like it and stop having to look to children to figure out how to accomplish this fact. So I think what we have to do now is not elect anybody who takes money from the gun lobby. Let's start there.
The answer to reducing gun violence is courage and conviction, and the time is now. We have been too late on this issue, and many, many children and friends and neighbors of ours have died because of it. Look, my daughter goes to the local public school in Greene County. And in Greene County, guns are part of the culture. You don't go hunting in the woods, you go hunting in your backyard. And my daughter goes to school there, and my wife works at the local public school. And they went through active shooter training this week. They shouldn't have to come home and talk to me about what they're doing at school. Courage and conviction, let's not let this moment pass. Let's sue the gun manufacturers for liability. Let's close the loopholes. Let's have universal background checks. Let's make sure we keep weapons of war out of the hands of civilians. And let's also repeal the Dickey Amendment, which is what prevents us from getting the information we need about what is causing gun violence. But also the most important issue of all is let's get money out of politics. I don't know what we're so afraid of. The NRA, 90% of gun owners are not in the NRA. Gun owners will be part of the solution. What are we afraid of? The NRA is funded by gun manufacturers, and 2 of the 3 top gun manufacturers are on the edge of bankruptcy. Let's stand up to them with the courage and conviction to make this happen. In 1988, my older brother was killed in the Lockerbie bombing. And when that happened, just like those kids down in Florida, I was just a teenager. But we started protesting, and together with the other families, we took on the big corporations who allowed the bombing to happen. We changed federal law, and we didn't stop until we'd won. And right now, we need that type of conviction on this issue. It is up to us, the people in this room, to fight together, to take on the gun lobby, to do what's right for our children, and do what's right for our country. And we need leaders who've been there and have experience and can take us there. Thank you.
Did anyone here watch the town hall meeting or the meeting that was done down in Florida on CNN? That was with Rubio on stage and Bill Nelson. It was just striking to me to watch it. Here's a 14-year-old high school student who gets up on stage and asks Marco Rubio how he feels about these high-capacity magazines. And Rubio changes his position on stage. He can't justify the NRA's position, so he says, I'm going to change my position on this. Think about how important it is. A 14-year-old got a sitting U.S. senator to change their position on gun control. This generation is not going to settle until we pass common sense gun safety laws. I was thinking if we just lower the voting age to about 16, think how many of these members of Congress would be kicked out because they're such cowards on this. Yes, exactly. And after that town hall, I was watching on CNN, they had a panel, and there was a father there from Columbine. One of his children had died in Columbine. And he said, maybe this is the impetus. Maybe this shooting is the impetus where things change. 19 years later, finally something might happen. I am part of that Columbine generation where we have grown up, and this has been a reality for us. That's why if we elect a new generation to Congress, we will fix these issues because we don't have a choice. We're sick and tired of watching this happen. Now, I know here in Columbia County, and you know this just as well, you can run for dog catcher or you can run for Senate. And the Republicans will say, you're a Democrat, must want to take away your gun and raise your taxes. That's every single campaign. I will be able to stand up against that because I grew up in this district working on a farm where a gun was a tool. When the coyotes come for your chickens, it's important that you have a gun. But I also believe in the importance of gun safety, background checks, the assault weapons ban, safe storage laws, something that John Faso voted against when he was a member of the Assembly. So I say to me, this is very simple. Let's not let John Faso get a second term over the Second Amendment. I'm happy any day of the week to go to the range with John Faso and go see who can hit more clay pigeons. I guarantee I will beat him, and let's not let him win a second term over this. Thank you.
So I was at a meeting in Dutchess County the day after the horrific attack in Florida, and I can't get this memory out of my head because a young mother stood up and she talked about her experience that morning having dropped her kids off at school who were 3 and 6. And she started talking and she completely broke down in front of this group of 30 friends and neighbors. And then I broke down. The whole room, we were all sitting in that moment of how is this the discussion we're having in our country right now? And I've particularly had this image in my head of a story I read of one of the teachers in Parkland who died with his body huddled over his young students trying to protect them. And to think that the weapon that I carried, basically the exact weapon I carried for 27 months, was used by a 19-year-old young man to walk into a school on our home soil here in America to fire a 5.56 millimeter round at high velocity that's designed to enter the human body and not exit, but actually bounce around and cause as much internal damage as possible. That is a weapon of war and pure violence. And I will, till my dying breath, say that and other assault weapons and other weapons of war have no place in our schools, at our concerts, at our churches, and in our streets. And we have to, as my colleague said, have the moral courage to take that position. And I will do that, and you have my word on that. And I think that, frankly, in this field, I can lead on this issue. I think, Dave mentioned Brian Mast in Florida, who's a Republican, by the way. But I think having served and having seen this the violence that these weapons can inflict, I can go have those discussions with people and actually get something done to move us forward. That's my second bell, sorry.
All right, thank you guys. The next question is going to be, so we're running ahead, so we may actually do a fourth question, if that's okay with you guys. I know some of you have to leave right on time, but you will certainly get out of here before noon. All right. Yep. That's why we do it. All right. This is about beating John Faso, which clearly this is what we're here for. John Faso has been deft at distancing himself from national Republicans and playing both sides of the issue on some unpopular issues like health care and the tax bill. How do you plan to combat this, and what is your plan to beat him?
So I want to tell a story because I think this sort of illustrates how we beat John Faso, or how I plan to anyway. So I was at a VFW recently, and in our district here, there's about 698,000 people. 42,613 of them are veterans. And I went into VFW and going to a lot of them, and they were nice enough to have me for a lunch to come and introduce myself. And I walked in the room and I tried to get a sense of what's the laydown of the room here. And if I'm being generous, I think 2 of the about 40 vets there were Democrats. I know one of them was, because he told me when we were having pizza. And I got up like this and I introduced myself. I talked about the fact that actually this was in Kingston. My grandpa had been a member of that VFW. Talked about my service. I talked about how much it meant to me that a lot of the men and some women in that room had been at my grandfather's funeral and handed me a folded flag on behalf of my family. And And then the first question I was asked was a really tough leading question on immigration. And I knew the answer that this gentleman wanted by the way he asked it, and I knew I wasn't going to give him that answer. And I said, our willingness as a country to open our arms to anyone who wants to come here, regardless of their station or where they're coming from or their race or their religion or their gender or anything else, that's one of the things that's made us so special, and it transcends partisan identity. And he didn't applaud my answer, that's for sure, but he sat down. And what gave me hope, though, was another gentleman to my right stood up, and he raised his hand and he said, you know, in 10 minutes, I know more about who you are and what you'll stand for and the integrity you'll bring to the job than I do about John Faso, who I voted for 9 months ago. And that moment gave me a lot of hope, and we can have, and we will continue to have more of those conversations, and we need about 25,000 of them to make up the margin we lost by. So that's what I'm going to do in my campaign. And that's my third bell.
The question is about John Faso and holding him accountable for his record, and I look forward to doing that this fall. John Faso, his entire career, has said one thing and then done another. We saw it in Congress where he promised twice. He promised that he would not vote to defund Planned Parenthood. Then he went to Congress and then voted twice to defund Planned Parenthood. But this goes back through Faso's entire career, starting in 1987, where as a member of the state assembly, even amongst the Republicans in the assembly, he was even separate from them in what he believed and what he did. I'll give you some examples. In the early 1990s, there was a bill going through the state assembly to bring money to rural communities to improve education. 150 members of the assembly, 149 voted yes. Who was the one who voted no? John Faso. 2002, New York State Assembly is passing a constitutional amendment, equal pay for equal work. Equal pay for equal work, put in the New York State Constitution. 149 members of the assembly vote yes. Who do you think votes no? John Faso. This is his entire career, where he has presented himself as a moderate, but his voting record is exactly the opposite. He gets up in Congress today and says, I am part of the Problem Solvers Caucus. I am doing this. Well, point to me one problem that you have solved. He says he's working on this climate change caucus. Well, his first vote in office was to allow coal waste into streams. If you have the privilege to serve the community that represents the Hudson Valley, the Catskill Mountains, you must be the most outspoken member on the environment in Congress. Faso has been the opposite. And on the tax bill, when Faso ran for governor in 2006, he proposed a flat tax. He wanted to completely change our progressive tax code to make it a flat tax, which would only benefit the wealthiest New Yorkers. This has been his entire approach. He talks about our senior citizens. In 2004, he was leading the charge to privatize Social Security. So this is why having a record in state government and politics here is important, because I know that record and I will hold him accountable to it.
I love the contrast of John Faso, a career politician and lobbyist who wears tasseled loafers, against a lifelong, scrappy, progressive activist who's created hundreds of blue-collar American jobs and has also been to Washington and gotten legislation passed that made us safer and made for a better country. That contrast is a great contrast, and I can't wait to face him on that. I will hold him accountable for his votes on health care because I've been advocating for Medicare for All since 2004. I will hold him accountable for his defunding of Planned Parenthood. I will hold him accountable for that tax law, which was a giveaway to wealthy and to corporations and did nothing to invest in our community, even though he voted against it when it was just safe enough for him to do it. We will hold him accountable for all of those things, and we will hit him hard again and again and again. But it's not about John Faso. It's about what we need to do to win back the people that used to vote for us. I was in Arkville and meeting with maple syrup producers at a maple syrup tasting, which is always a good idea, especially if it's next to a distillery. And some of the gentlemen there, we were talking about them. They're discussing their businesses, their challenges. I'm telling them about my ideas to grow the economy, to help small businesses. And they said to me, wow, you've got great ideas. You really understand what we're dealing with. You understand how businesses work and what we can do to grow the economy. You've got great ideas. This is terrific. We're going to support you. I said, great. Remember Brian Flynn for Congress? And I started walking away. And then they did that thing. They said, what party are you from? said, oh no. I said, I'm a Democrat. And they said, oh, well, I'm no Democrat. I work for a living. I said, isn't that our problem? Right there. That's what's happened. We used to be the party of the American worker. We used to have ideas. That's who we used to pay attention to. And that's why my entire campaign is about not only creating jobs, but removing those barriers. That's what we used to stand for. And we're going to need big, bold ideas. So we have to go out there and we have to do Medicare for all. We have to invest in jobs that are going to affect here in our communities. But we can't just be against something. We have to fight for something. We have to build an America that works for everybody, and we need to stand for that. That's what's going to win people over and enable us to beat John Faso. And we need the right messenger to make it happen. No bell, please. Please, no bell. Thank you.
I think we all understand that this is a very important year for the future of this place we call home, for the country, and for the world. We've got to flip the House. I believe that with all my heart. And we have a very vulnerable congressman who's a freshman congressman in John Faso, who is weak. But we have to keep in mind a few things. He's seasoned, and he does have the machine behind him. And a lot of outside money pouring in. The Mercer family, which gave $10 million to Breitbart, the platform for the alt-right, has admitted, or not even admitted, given him $500,000 in 2016 through the IE expenditures. He's going to be a force, no matter what. And so the question has to be, who can beat him? And how? How do we put a candidate in front of him who can beat him? And in my opinion, you got to put somebody in front of him who can do it all. 1, outwork him. 2, outraise him. 3, outorganize him. And then inspire real turnout. That has to be the answer. Now, I'll outwork him because that's what I know. I come from a working class family. I was taught from Yale High to work twice as hard, and I've been doing that ever since. I will also outraise him. In fact, I know that because that's what I've been doing since the early in 2017. I'm the only candidate on this stage that can say that. I've raised more than $1.5 million. And for the record, all of that comes from individuals, not a dollar from a corporation or a corporate PAC. And we're going to use that money, and we're going to build an organization all across this district. In fact, we already have with offices. We're already on TV, only candidate on this stage to do that. And we're already on the attack. We're going to talk about all the things that Gareth talked about everywhere with our resources. We're going to then speak to people's hearts and minds. And we're going to remind people who we are at our soul, at our core, and get beyond all the tribalism and speak to our principles and remind our Democrats, the folks who know what it means to be a progressive, that we have to get off our butts and show it if we're going to actually be it. And that means having a candidate who can speak to the hearts and minds of people, and I think I can do that. Thank you.
I've been spreading this message about neighbor to neighbor. Aren't we all neighbors? Isn't this district something where we're all in the same place for 98% of what we care about raising our kids, about giving our place the security that it needs, about giving a good education to our kids? All those things are things that we can join together and find a common ground. When I've been going through this district, I found that wherever I went, if I had a chance to talk to somebody for more than a few minutes, if you could get by that one little hot button question that some Republican or some independent is concerned about, you can find common ground. And then you can find higher ground. Now, John Faso is a phony. And he tells us what we want to hear, and then he goes and does what his wealthy donor class wants to do. Now, it's easy to hold his feet to the fire. He has committed so many egregious acts against the benefit and the best interests of our community, starting with the health care decision that he made to take down the Affordable Care Act and take away 60,000 people's health care. He's going to be held accountable for that. So how do we get around it? He's got dark money. I know he's got dark money out there with the Mercers and everything else. So what you need is a candidate who can reach across the aisle, who can reach across the divide. I've not only been an ordained deacon, as you know, and working in the community, dedicated to uplifting people for the last 4 decades, but I'm also a small businessman, so I've represented small businesses. I've been in the Chamber of Commerce for the last 30 years, so I can reach across those divides on each and every level. And I've got such dedication to the community that we care about. So as a civil rights attorney, as an ordained deacon, as somebody who's worked for the human rights, as somebody who's got 30, 40 years of caring for the community, put me against John Faso, and I will win. Thank you.
We had an interesting moment on my campaign, actually, just this last week. As you all know, petition season began, and we began collecting signatures. And hundreds of people came who were followers of my campaign and supporters and wanted to step up to carry petitions for us. But there's a requirement for carrying petitions, one that I didn't think it would be hard for all of them to meet, but it turned out it would, which is you have to be a registered Democrat. And we found out happily, and this is why we're already beating John Faso, that many of the people that volunteered to support our campaign were registered Republicans. And many of them wanted to go out and carry petitions. There were also independents. They have all been coming together to support what is now a large grassroots campaign that has more than twice the social media following of any other campaign now running. And we're running that campaign because we believe we can win a new majority here, and we're already doing it. If we dare to stand up to John Faso with policies that benefit more than 90% of the people in the district, you can win a coalition of support that will in fact be far greater than the old 51-49 victories that Democrats try to eke out and have to stop aiming for. So how do you beat him? I think you beat him by being a contrast to John Faso. John Faso has a record of indistinguished government service. I served in the federal government over the course of a decade and got our country results by actually negotiating agreements overseas and by working across the aisle here at home. I'm standing up not just for better access to affordable care, as some Democrats would say, but actually standing up for Medicare for all, House Resolution 676, to pass it now. John Faso will parrot ideas about standing up for our environment, but in the end, he voted to allow dumping in our streams, and he won't take the stance that only I have taken in this primary, which is to stand up for the Off Fossil Fuels Act, to put a moratorium on these fossil fuel projects right now, because we cannot afford more CO2 in our atmosphere, and move immediately to a Green New Deal that can actually increase employment across all sectors. That's the way we beat him. Be different from him. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to do one more question because we're running out of time. Cindy Doran, the candidate for Assembly 107, is scheduled to be here at 11:45, so we'll do one more question. Maybe you guys can meet these guys. We'll take a break, and then she'll be here. People that are interested in hearing her speak or talking to her. All right, the fourth question. So Democrats often are really focused on national issues. They're really kind of dedicated to that. A lot of discussions we have around the table or at our committee meeting are national issues, but polling has showed that actually local issues actually turn people out to vote. It's what they're really concerned about. And so this question is about housing. It's one question here that's like, it's very important to the working families and the working people in this town. All right, Columbia County and the town of Hillsdale faces a lack of affordable housing for young families, employees, and seniors. Do you have any federal or maybe state proposals that you can help these people? Thank you. I'm going to do in the middle because it seems like the ends get double play.
Thank you. A key part of my plan for the American worker is investments in infrastructure, but critically, I explicitly state housing infrastructure. And the issue with housing is both an issue of availability and access. And what's important, why it's so important, because where you live affects so much of your life. It affects your access to education, your access to healthcare, your access to jobs, and even your own health. So when it comes to availability, one of the biggest problems we've seen is we have not made the investments necessary for workforce housing or affordable housing. And what it's done is actually created scarcity and has driven up prices, and that prevents people from actually participating in our communities. We have people driving 70 miles from outside our district to come and work inside our district, and therefore they're taking that money and taking it back out, and we're not building thriving communities. So we need to invest in that infrastructure, but along with that, we need to have federal programs that support water and sewer infrastructure as well, because it's often we have to look at smart growth, not just growth. The second thing is access. we continue to have explicit discrimination in our access to housing in our country. Even just this week, HUD came out and removed, as part of their mission statement, that they would build inclusive communities free from discrimination. Can you imagine taking that out, which shows the explicit discrimination we're seeing? Now, right here in your community, not far from here, we had the Bliss Towers. And what that is an example of, the horrible conditions that existed there, was because HUD has a $30 to $50 billion backlog on support and repairs that need to be done to public housing. And why hasn't happened? Because they've defunded it in an effort to eventually force the privatization of public housing. So we're trying to, in your communities, you're trying to build affordable housing. You have no support from the federal government. Not only do you have no support, you also have them taking money out and undermining any sort of housing infrastructure you might have. Right now, it is so critical, and is a key part of my plan, that we take money, and if we want to create jobs and remove barriers for people, we have to put money into housing in communities like this that enables people to be part of our community and to stay and to grow and to thrive. Thank you.
So I came across an article, I don't know if you guys saw this in the New York Times this week, or was it last week? Ben Carson kind of got wrapped up in a little bit. Apparently there's not enough money in HUD, but I got about $31,000 available for his new dining set. This coming from somebody who says that poverty is a state of mind. That should have disqualified him from the start. This is the issue, right? That we have folks who are heading these departments who don't seem to get it. And we have too many folks in Congress who don't come from the margins, who haven't had to rely on not a handout, to be clear, a hand up, right? At the end of the day, it is the responsibility of our government to promote the general welfare, to enable public good and not foster private greed. That is the objective of good government. And we've gotten way, way adrift from that reality. So much so that we have folks in Congress now that, despite the fact we have all this inequality, they want to pass a tax bill that will add more than $1 trillion to our deficit, and then turn around and say we can't fund Medicaid, we can't fund Medicare, and oh yeah, we're certainly not going to be able to fund HUD. So how do we fix it? Well, how about we repeal the tax scam, right? How about we close the corporate loopholes, do away with the tax havens, and make sure that corporations actually pay their fair share instead of giving them a blank check to go ahead and buy their stocks back and pay off their executives? How about we do that? Guess what we'll have? Real revenue, prosperity that we can actually share in, invest in, from infrastructure to our schools, to our healthcare system, and of course, to housing. This is how government ought to work. Thank you.
Affordable housing is actually a crisis in our country, throughout the country, not just in the urban areas, but throughout the country. And what is our government doing about it? Nothing, as in nothing. As in, HUD is now being cut by up to 30%, the HUD budget, with Ben Carson's approval. So you've got a man in charge of HUD that doesn't believe in the mission of HUD, who doesn't even think that self-sufficiency is something that people can rely on and that's enough, right? That's all he needs is self-sufficiency. We need to change the way government works. We can do better. The Bliss Towers event, where John Faso actually went over and took a look at it, he wrote a letter to Ben Carson. Is that going to go anywhere? Is anything going to happen with that? What we need, once again, is a transformation of our country. We do need infrastructure. If you look at the caucus, the Progressive Caucus in Congress, they have a budget that says we're going to put $1 trillion into infrastructure. And part of that is going to be into housing. And we can now, there's got to be a whole movement. We got to move into a clean energy world. We got to transform the housing. We have to transform the way that we get our energy with wind power and solar power and hydroelectric. All those things can be put together. If we do that, if we get jobs from clean energy, the pay is so much more substantial than what you get right now. So we can change the level of income, change the access to housing. work on affordable housing, work on changing and making houses more green and making the community a better place. That's what I believe in. Thank you.
You all know that our district actually houses the home of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and that's an incredible legacy. And maybe you don't know, I'm a U.S. history teacher also, and he gave a second address calling for a second Bill of Rights. And among them was the idea of affordable housing, which we don't have in our home. Why do we not have it? We don't have it for a number of reasons. Far too much of everybody's paycheck, including my own, winds up going to one's rent or housing. And that has become extremely disproportionate over the years. Now, I share your desire, because we're all Democrats, that we want the candidates to come up with the great 5-point bullet plan of how to solve these problems. But the truth is they are systematic problems in our economy that can only be solved when we sever the ties of a giant, giant financial industry that is underlying why we don't have enough money here. There are forces of gentrification in our home that have made it such that people, myself, who work in our community, can't afford a home in the very place they work. And these forces are also at work in the city of Hudson, where a major developer has bought up much of the property, a tremendous amount, and essentially warehoused it, and it's not available. That same developer has put money into this primary to a campaign here. So you have to realize that these forces are pretty large, they're in existence in our economy, and the way to stand up against them is to run grassroots campaigns that rally people. You know who's out gathering signatures for me right now? A couple that I was with yesterday who are residents of a mobile home, a manufactured home in a manufactured home lot. They are gathering out signatures of their residents. You know why? Because we've been talking about it lately, and I've met with a leader who is organizing these citizens to find out that Wall Street right now and hedge fund managers have begun buying up mobile home manufactured lots in our community and across the country because they realize it's the ultimate captive audience. If you buy the land, they're stuck on their home. You can cut the services and lift the lot rates on everybody, the lot rent, and nobody can do anything about it. If we stand up for that and stand with those people, we'll truly be the party of the people. Thank you.
So like a lot of the other candidates, we've been out the last week knocking on doors, which is, I think, the most fun part of a campaign, and we've been looking forward to doing to get signatures on petitions. And I think it's so important that we constantly challenge ourselves to get out of our own bubbles in a bunch of different ways, in our physical world, in our virtual world, and get out and see how our neighbors and our friends are living. And there are a lot of doors that I knocked on and my volunteers have been knocking on where people are really struggling, particularly to just keep the homes that they have or to put more money into fixing them. And we're seeing, Antonio talked about HUD and others. We are at a place in our country right now, we're going to have to make arguments I thought we would never have to make in my lifetime to re-justify investments in housing and education and the environment and infrastructure and our healthcare system. And I go back to the Declaration of Independence, where we said everyone has these rights to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, and that government is formed to secure those rights for all. And that when everyone has those rights, we are all better off. And I thought we had decided that. But we haven't, and we're going to have to make this case again and again. And I think, obviously we have to put more funding into HUD to fix problems like in Bliss Towers and so many other places across this district. But we also have to put more money in the pockets of people working here, working hard, working multiple jobs. We got to raise the minimum wage. We got to actually invest in skills training programs for the 70% of young people here who don't go to college, who we don't do enough to arm with those skills to make a better living for them and their family. Those are the things that we need to do, and I will make that case over and over because I believe that's what our whole country was founded on, and we're going to have to remind everybody of that. Thank you.
Todd, I love this question because it's about local issues, and I think local issues are the most important issues, and that's why I'm going to every single town in this district, because that is what I'm hearing from people in these different towns, is what is on your mind. And I remember talking to Tom Gilbert out at Catamount, and he was telling me about he has several dozen year-long employees at the ski slope but they don't live here in Hillsdale. They live elsewhere. Some of them drive 20, 30, 40 miles to come to a job here because we don't have that middle income housing in so many towns in this district. There's things we can do. Community trusts, making sure we incentivize low income housing. We can incentivize that middle income housing bracket. And that's going to do something that's very important to me, which is help keep young people here in our communities. So many young people in my position who grew up here, went to high school here, went to college, and never came back. And I talked to our local fire departments. They can't find enough volunteers. EMT services, they can't find enough volunteers. And the result is the towns are forced to privatize, continuing to drive up local property taxes and forcing more and more people to leave our communities. And there are people in this room who I know are working very hard to change this. I see Ned Schneier with the Columbia Green, what you've done with Columbia Green Community College, in making sure that we are training our young people for the jobs that are here in this community. We need to do more to support our local community colleges, and we can do that on the federal side by bringing money back to make sure that we're training our young people. What Peter Volkman has done with the opioid crisis in Chatham and here in Columbia County is provided a national model, really I believe it's a national model for how local law enforcement can work together to not stigmatize opioid addiction, something that's so important for the young people in this community. I can go through my high school yearbook and I can tell you almost everyone's gone, but many who are here are struggling with this. And that is why, to me, going to every single town is what's going to make the difference in this election, because we need to look our neighbors in the eye, listen, and present a real clear platform for how we can work together to move this community ahead. Thank you.
I want to say thank you to all 6 candidates. Thank you. You can give it a round of applause now for everybody. And we're going to have a break here. I would ask if you could stick around for Cindy Doran. She's on her way. If you want to meet her, otherwise, mix and mingle with the candidates here. The refreshments downstairs. Please donate to the Rojan Food Pantry if you can. And thank you to the Copake Committee for helping organize this, and a bunch of other people that I'm sure I'm forgetting. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.